This last week in baseball, we had two managerial firings. Just before Alex Cora and Rob Thompson were made to walk the plank, my wife happened to ask me if, with teams like the Red Sox, Phillies, and Mets underperforming, we were going to see a spate of dismissals. Nah, I said, no one believes that's a solution anymore since all the power is with the front office. The manager's just a caretaker. It's a good thing that there's no need for my wife to take me seriously because after that, why should she? I think I had confused me with everyone else, meaning whereas I've decided there's generally no point to firing managers in season, front offices may still think otherwise. Now, I will concede that there might be a point if the manager has lost it in some way, say he's gone all Captain Queeg on the clubhouse, talking about strawberries. Who ate the strawberries? There were strawberries in the fridge in my manager's office, and someone ate the strawberries. It must have been the third catcher, Bob. Who even knows he's around? Only I do. And by the way, the strawberries are a metaphor for my wife. She's taken an unusual interest in Bob lately. You'd think that mental illness in the dugout would be something of an outlier. Then again, when you look at the incidence of mental illness in the general population, maybe it's that we're all playing for the New York Cheshire Cats. We're all mad here. And with every pitching change, we just lose it a little bit more. But I think more broadly, the reason that managers are kind of innocent is that if your team, if you're the manager of the Red Sox specifically, let's say, and the owner decides that he's just not interested in paying Mookie Betts or Chris Sale anymore, what are you going to do? It's above your pay grade. Why should you be fired for not having Mookie Betts? And that's the story of most failed managers. As someone who's written a book about Casey Stengel, do you know how bored I get of looking at commentators then, now, in between some of his more pointy-headed players who would say, well, of course he won with the Yankees. He had the horses. He didn't win with the Braves, did he? Or the Dodgers or the Mets? Where was his vaunted genius then, you tell me? What I would tell you, in the words of John Rhys Davies in Raiders of the Lost Ark, is you're digging in the wrong place. That is not where a manager's genius lies. Doing the impossible has never been where a manager's genius lies. Definitionally, that just doesn't happen. It's in smaller, more subtle things, including sorting playing time. And a subset of that is not getting too attached to players who then become your guys and are immovable from the lineup even when they're no longer helping the team. But if the manager has a roster of 20 to 25 of the wrong type of unicorns, backward unicorns you might call them, inverted unicorns, then it doesn't matter who that manager is or what he's accomplished with good teams. You can make two mediocre players better by platooning them, but you can't make two bad players better by platooning them. Nor can you construct a 5-man rotation when you only have 3 decent starters. Or, for that matter, none at all. Now, back in the early days of baseball, the manager was also the guy most often shaping the roster, and even after the advent of the general manager, the manager still often had the freedom to choose to pitch someone for 300 innings or not pitch them at all because they were annoying or black or Jewish, and to decide not to play the team's top prospect for the same reason or simply because he didn't trust young players. Some people just don't want to teach. Now they don't have that sort of latitude. Do you think there's the slightest chance that Chris Antonetti, the team president of the Guardians, said to Stephen Vogt this week, hey man, we're calling up Travis Bazzana. He's your new second baseman. And Vogt said, no, I don't think so. I'd prefer it if you could acquire someone like Adam Frazier or Andy Ibanez, a veteran I know I can trust to handle the ball. There's zero chance of that. He might offer some opinion, and one assumes Antonetti would take it into account, but if he decided Bazzana needs to come up, if Antonetti did, he's going to be up, and he's going to play. This used to be the subject of power struggles between the general manager and the manager. When Hank Greenberg was running the Cleveland Indians, he endured the blowback from firing popular shortstop manager Lou Boudreau, something even Bill Veeck had quailed at doing. In a 1954 piece in Life magazine, Greenberg explained part of the issue, that Boudreau wanted to substitute his judgment for that of the front office. Greenberg wrote, each new player delivered in the spring to a big league manager under the farm system method represents upwards of $100,000 of corporate spending for bonus and salary, scouting, study, optioning, supervision, transportation, teaching, and even medical bills. Again, keep in mind, these are 1954 dollars, not 2026 dollars. Extension of front office operation then comes as the manager tests the new player under big league conditions. A single look, a few innings of competition in a game already lost will not suffice. He represents a small fortune. Was it wasted or not? If a big league manager's pride and ego thrive upon his unique ability to detect talent or lack of it when others can't, he'll never get along with the front office. Decisions based on whim or caprice are useless. As a corporate employee, the manager must return a fair and concrete appraisal of the rookie's value. He must get results from players handed over to him or give a valid reason for their failure. I wish I knew who the specific examples were that Greenberg was thinking about, young players that Boudreau might have denigrated. Cleveland was a pretty veteran team at that time. This would have been about 1950, or about 2 years after they won what has proved to be the last championship in franchise history to date. That they still had a lot of players left over from that roster might have been the very thing that Greenberg was out to change and that Boudreau was resisting. Now, there was only one promising young player Greenberg brought up at that time who didn't stick and was subsequently traded and turned out to be really good. That was Minnie Minoso. Minnie was signed in 1948, given 9 games in 1949, and farmed out for the entirety of 1950, Boudreau's last season with the team. He was given a very brief trial in 1951 under new manager Al Lopez, then dealt away as part of the 3-team deal with the White Sox and A's that got Cleveland left-handed pitcher Lou Brissy, a war hero who was pitching on one extremely damaged leg, but not in any sense a rotation-making or breaking player. So to bring matters up to today, if your general manager refuses to play Minnie Minoso, then fire him. If Lou Boudreau, your manager, refuses to play him, so you feel like you have no choice but to trade Minnie Minoso, then fire Lou Boudreau. Except again, that mostly can't happen because managers now accept they're creatures of the front office. The exception might be the touted prospect bust, something that seems to have played into Craig Breslow's decision to fire Alex Cora. Heading into the 2025 season, Christian Campbell was a consensus top 10 prospect in all of baseball after, in 2024, the then second baseman made the climb from high A to triple A while hitting .330 with a .439 on-base percentage and a .558 slugging percentage. He had 20 home runs, 24 stolen bases, and 74 walks. That's like the world's greatest salad bar. It contains a little bit of everything. The Red Sox have had constant turnover at second base since Dustin Pedroia lost the ability to play regularly. Teams go through periods like that at given positions. Somehow it's third base that comes to mind. The Dodgers, the Mets, the White Sox at different times went through more or less decades without a quality regular at the position. It's not quite that they got nothing before Ron Cey or Howard Johnson or Robin Ventura came along, but it's close. For the Red Sox, it's been about 8 years in no particular order of Christian Arroyo and Brock Holt and Emmanuel Valdez. It's just that Eduardo Nunez was a utility infielder who couldn't infield, which gets us into surreal territory again. We're all mad here. We're wearing gloves, but we have no hands, or is that vice versa? Trevor Story moved over for a season. Kike Hernandez, Michael Chavez, for gosh sakes, Vaughn Grissom, new star in Anaheim, Pablo Reyes. It's a long list. I haven't given you but half of it, and some of them performed decently, but sporadically and not at a level offensively or defensively where anyone responsibly planning the next great Red Sox team would say, yeah, we can go forward with this guy. We're set. And so, of course, the Sox would welcome Campbell winning a job in spring training last year. And for about a week, it seemed like they were right to feel that way. In his first 8 games, he went 11 for 26. That's .423, and he hit 2 home runs. And then he turned off like a light. As it turned out, he was also a second baseman who could not play second base. He was sent down in June. He performed modestly the rest of the way, while the Sox gave him reps at first base and the outfield. They then seemed to give no thought to him making the team out of spring training this year. He's currently hitting a light 273 at AAA Worcester, and defensively has not come anywhere near the dirt. And the conclusion of the Red Sox front office seems to have been, Christian Campbell did not fail us. We failed Christian Campbell, and by that they meant the coaching staff. If that's true, that would seem to fall within the Lou Boudreau exception to in-season manager firings. In being so dismissive of the possibility of sudden changes in the dugout, I had blithely disregarded the 4 such firings last year. The Orioles, Nationals, Pirates, and Rockies made in-season changes. There were also 4 in-season firings in 2022. Mostly, though, for most teams, it's been quiet, excluding very late season firings in which interim managers took over for a week or 10 days. More than half of teams haven't canned a manager during the season in over 10 years. Prior to Cora's termination, the Red Sox hadn't fired a manager during the campaign since Jimmy Williams, or Jimey, as I prefer to think of him due to the lack of 2 M's in his name. He was replaced by Joe Kerrigan. That was in 2001. That's getting to be a long time ago. Some of us were younger then. We're all younger here, said the baby Cheshire Cat on the Saturday morning Lewis Carroll Babies cartoon, except he said it in an unbearably squeaky voice. 4 teams have not felt the need to fire a manager during the season during this century. Can you name them? All 4? I'll give you a second. Somewhat incredibly, the Yankees are one of them. The other 3 are the Dodgers, the Twins, and the Giants. Can you name the changes, to paraphrase a Paul McCartney song? No, here we go, in reverse order. In 1998, the Dodgers replaced former shortstop Bill Russell after 74 games, with Glenn Hoffman taking over. Davey Johnson got the job next year. Hoffman never managed again. In 1990, a visibly flailing Yankees organization fired team hero Bucky Dent and replaced him with caretaker Stump Merrill. In 1986, the Twins ended the short reign of Ray Miller and inaugurated the long reign of Tom Kelly, who quit at 50. Good for him. Finally, the Giants. They fired managers both in 1984 and 1985, and I'd be tempted to treat Frank Robinson's termination at the 106 game mark in 1984 as the real deal, and Jim Davenport's firing in 1985 with less than 3 weeks to go as one of those that aren't legitimately in season for the purposes of this discussion. The reason to make an exception is that Roger Craig proved to be no interim manager, but the skipper who not only lasted the next 7 years, but led the team back to the World Series for the first time in 25 years. I don't think there's any great lesson for teams here or for us, except that, broadly speaking, unless things get to be in a really bad place, the teams don't like to make these changes anymore. They've accepted that, for the large part, the responsibility lies elsewhere, and the fault too. And sometimes when they do fire the managers, teams do get better, but mostly they don't, or at least they don't get meaningfully better, because the whole reason the manager was in trouble was that the general manager had furnished him with a bad roster. Conversely, the advent of the wild card puts pressure on those same general managers or owners to move earlier, because if by some lucky chance you can salvage the season, you might get into October play with only, say, 80-something wins. The PECOTA predictions for the rest of the season heading into play on May 1st show the Phillies with a 45% chance of reaching the postseason and the Mets with a 39% chance of making the postseason. It doesn't expect that either one of them is going to win very much more than 82 games, which is just over the break-even point. And yet, they figure the wild card will be sufficiently weak to qualify them anyway. The Red Sox are a different deal because they're playing in the difficult AL East with a lot of tough opponents, so they only have a 14% chance of making it. In all 3 cases, though, with every loss, those predictions are going to get harder to justify and, in fact, will start rolling backwards. To make them true, these teams have to get off the slide and start winning again. And so, grasping at straws, 2 of those 3 teams have made the change already. The Mets say they're not going to, and let's hope that's true, because I personally find it bad karma to root for anyone to be fired. And again, I don't think that's where the problem lies anyway. Let me go back just for fun to when the Giants fired Frank Robinson in 1984. He was not quite 2 seasons past winning 87 games with a Giants team that had no business being that good, given a starting rotation of Bill Lasky, Atlee Hammaker, Rich Gale, Rennie Martin, and whoever in the bullpen wasn't throwing up that day. The 84 team had a defense so bad you can smell it from here over 40 years later. I am not being hyperbolic. The primary infield was Al Oliver at first, Manny Trio at second, Joel Youngblood at third, and Johnny LeMaster at short. Oliver was 37 and played first base because he was too old to play the outfield anymore. Trio had been a Gold Glover but had aged out of his best years. Youngblood was an outfielder who could fake third base a little, by which I mean that your poodle poppy seed might be mistaken for Kirsten Dunst, provided that the light is extremely low. He fielded .887, 36 errors in 114 games. LeMaster was just never any good on either side of the ball. The pitching staff was one of the worst in Giants team history, and that history goes all the way back to the 19th century, though that's very hard to separate from just how terrible the gloves were. The general manager was Tom Haller. Robinson was the manager. Was he the easiest guy to get along with? No, and that was undoubtedly part of things too. But who can blame him given what the front office had supplied him with? And that's my whole takeaway from this exercise in firings. It's this question: what the hell do you want from Frank Robinson? His restless spirit still roams the universe searching for the answers, but none is to be found, not even in the haunted corridors of the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 372 in an ongoing series. And you know how a few moments ago I said it was bad karma to root for anyone to be fired? That excludes you, Scott. This offer does not apply to you. You deserve everything you get, Scott. Sealed with a kiss and signed with love from your congenial host, not terribly congenial in that moment, but generally speaking, Stephen Goldman, for this trip to the past on a mission to better understand the present, the time machine being the game of baseball, and we will be sticking with the game of baseball, plus a little romance in this particular episode. As ever, I hope this particular episode finds you well and happy and healthy and good spirits, not you, Scott. I do have a question, and I don't know anyone who can answer this for me, but it's something that has vexed me throughout the run of the program. Again, this is episode 372. We've been here almost 10 years, you and I, together, and I appreciate your loyalty. A lot of relationships don't run 10 years. The audience for this show varies widely from week to week, and I don't know if it's the accounting on the part of the platform, or it's you guys, or it's the topic that I pick. I will know with certain podcasts that I listen to. There are some I hit every single week, and there are some I dip in and out of, depending on whether the topic seems, to use this word again, congenial to me, salubrious to me, promising, auspicious. There is sometimes an understandable pattern to the rise and fall of the listenership in any given week, which is why I try to look more at the broad picture. Most of the time, on a standard week, there's a reliable number of you who come here and hang out with me. And then if, say, it's a holiday and it falls too near the weekend, well, then you're probably away. You're not wherever you normally listen to the show. And so, say, around Easter, the numbers drop pretty hard. And I expect some of you later caught up with it, and your listenership is captured in subsequent weeks, and maybe the rest of you just gave it a miss, figured it got dated, even though mostly I'm talking about things that happened in 5000 BC. And that is, of course, your prerogative, and heaven forfend that I get between you and an afternoon with Grandma. Grandma is much more important than this program. But then sometimes, and this is why I'm on about this, like in a recent week, the numbers just inexplicably drop by almost half. And I expect they'll come back, because they usually do. But I'm always left thinking, well, what did I do? Did I offend? And I suppose it's mostly just coincidence. I don't really know, though. But the difficult thing about it is, at our normal numbers, I'm thrilled to keep doing this program indefinitely. And when we have an off week, I'm thrown into sort of a state of existential doubt. And I don't mean to put that off on you who are here listening. Again, I appreciate every one of you. It's more a question that I am paradoxically asking of people who are not listening. And what is that? That's mad. Why? Because we're all mad here. But this really matters to me because I'm getting up there in years. I've grown old and blind in service to the infinite inning, to paraphrase George Washington. Really ethical guy. He should have been president. He should have had a mostly unsuccessful baseball team, or two named after him, maybe three. I've been on stage, and they're small stages, but they're mine for a number of years now. And I've had the opportunity on occasion to do some other things. And my reaction has always been, what? And leave show business? The costumes, the scenery, the makeup, the props, the audience that lifts you when you're down, the headaches, the heartaches, the backaches, the flops, the sheriff who escorts you out of town. Who was that masked man? I never even got a chance to thank him. I think it was D.B. Cooper. Well, that's one mystery solved, but strange of him doing us a good turn like that. Point being, I want to stay, but I don't want to outstay my welcome either. So I'm just trying to sort out sort of the ups and downs of the whole process and figuring out where my place is under the sun. And I don't know anything that anyone can do to help clarify that for me. I'd appreciate it, but right now I'm mighty confused. Awkward segue. I have not been confused over at Patreon, where I've continued to do the Dead Player of the Day Series 2 posts. We are almost 2/3 of the way through, or roughly there. This week's players included the utility man par excellence, Tony Phillips, who got into more than his share of clashes. The product of the Baker Bowl, Phillies third baseman Pinky Whitney. If you're looking for the best third baseman in Phillies history prior to Mike Schmidt, it might well be Pinky Whitney. He might actually not be that different from Alec Boehm, except that he was a better fielder by a lot. This is a sad one. Riel Cormier, a player from our own time who just unfortunately got a bad hand of cards and checked out before, well, what we would hope would be most of our times. And finally, a kid named Jack Daniels. And as I say in my introduction to that post, you try to figure out how to search on Jack Daniels and turn up a ball player instead of a bottle. I did my best, and I found him to be kind of an interesting player. Over at Baseball Prospectus, I dwelt on this same question of in-season managerial firings that I discussed with you now, under somewhat different terms. I got into the Yankees history of it all under George Steinbrenner and some other matters, and you can feel free to check that out if you do. I don't know if anyone ever does. Again, I'm just confused about all of this. I just want to be loved. That's all I want. And now, as we head into the inevitable break, I just want to talk to you for a few minutes. This is a total coincidence about the futility of monuments to oneself. On the other side, we'll talk about a writer, an actress, and also a shortstop, an outfielder, a pitcher, and a manager, the last of whom is all one person. So please hang with me during this quick intermission, and on the other side, we travel back to the 1880s. Before you board the time machine, please present your proof of smallpox inoculation to the purser. It's for your own good, believe me. So as I was saying, before we were forced to spend a few moments apart, I want to talk just a little bit about the futility of monuments to oneself. History will remember you or it won't. The way one can influence that is with great deeds, children, and art. Deeds, not words, and not logos. Now, with the latter part of the construction that I just mentioned, children and art, I'm borrowing just slightly from Stephen Sondheim, or I should say that he anticipated me there because I would have suggested the same formulation even if he hadn't. I want to tell you something personal and kind of dumb, but it's also part of who I am. I live in my hometown. I've dwelt elsewhere at times, but mostly I've been right where I started, not necessarily the same home, but in the same community. For most of that time, which goes back 100 years now, given how aged I am, there was a 7-Eleven store not far from where I'm sitting now. I'm talking about going back to the 1970s. In the days before there were dedicated comic book stores, when I was quite young, that's where I did my shopping. I'd nag my parents to take me there. The store had a spinner rack, and I would pick out however much new literature they would allow me to buy in a single trip. And I can still vividly conjure the feeling of going up to that spinner rack, seeing the assortment of new books, and remember, it had both rows and it had height. So you not only had to look down the rows, but then turn it to each of its four sides to see the entirety of what was available to you. I can remember what that smelled like. I'm very serious about this. I would give a lot to be able to experience that feeling in my life again. Well, the days of spinner racks ended. There came to be actual comic book stores, and beginning when I was a teenager, a young teenager, I would go to them, make friends with the owners or the employees or both, and hang out and talk about stories. And sometimes I worked in one myself. That was my teenage version of Cheers, the bar where everybody knows your name. That was with literature and sans beer. I did that right into adulthood. Just would kill an afternoon of a Friday, say, hanging out at the comic book store, gabbing with fellow enthusiasts. That's not something I can easily recreate right now either. Meanwhile, that 7-Eleven store endured decade after decade, even though it had lost its spinner rack. I didn't go in there that often. If I was driving by and say I needed a cup of coffee or something of that nature, I might stop in. But there were also many other choices that had superior coffee and friendlier staff and were better kept up. My understanding is that that has been all three a problem for the 7-Eleven company in the U.S. It's owned by a Japanese conglomerate, and in Japan, those stores are essential, and they have good quality stuff in them, food in particular. I have never been to Japan. Those of you who have or might happen to be listening from there are some of you. I hope you'll let me know if I'm correct about that. Here in my neck of the woods, the stores were quite run down, and the staff, probably not unreasonably, was highly unfriendly and seemed convinced that no matter who walked in, they were probably there to hold them up and rob the register or shoplift some candy, maybe both. They probably had a point, but it didn't make going in there at any time of the day feel like a good experience. In that sense, the couple of 7-Elevens in my town anticipated the post-COVID retail experience in general, where all your so-called convenience stores and your larger ones as well are now locking up any item that can be boosted and resold online, which is practically everything. You have to ask for help to get certain items, and since they've also greatly reduced sales staff in sort of a post-employment era of capitalism that we're in, there is no one to ask. And so the whole experience is pathetic, and as much as I can, I've reduced my shopping to online purchases. If I can have something dropped at my doorstep, I do, which is both avoiding the dystopia and being fully enmeshed in it. There is no escape. We are all mad here. Despite that, because of my sentimental attachment to that 7-Eleven store, whenever I drove by, which was fairly often, I felt a certain pang when I saw it there. I guess it was lost in a sense in that, yes, it still existed, and yes, it signified a very happy part of my childhood, but also it was no longer what it used to be. Well, a couple of years ago now, that 7-Eleven closed. It must have been there over 50 years, but it finally gave up the ghost. It stood vacant for quite a while and then was repurposed as a medical facility. This seems to be the ultimate fate of all retail. I don't know about your part of the world. It seems futile in mine. Not far from me is a shopping center that was once anchored by a CompUSA store. Do you remember that chain? You could buy a computer or parts, discs, software back when programs weren't just something that you downloaded. And I used to enjoy dropping in sometimes, usually if I needed something, but it was fun to see if there were any cool games in the bargain bin. CompUSA as a chain died a long time ago. Almost 20 years, I think. Computers were one of the first things that stopped being something that people bought retail because it was way too expensive compared to other methods that you could get them by mail order, which is functionally a very slow version of ordering stuff via the internet. and that too stood vacant for many, many years. Subsequently, it was also repurposed as some sort of medical facility. Since it was a very big store, I guess it housed many doctors. I don't know. I never went inside. I passed by recently and saw that the medical facility had also gone out of business. And I thought, what's left at this point? If the relics of when we had public spaces can't support retail and they can't support services for our increasingly aged population, what the hell is left? Let's let it all go back to nature. And I kind of hope it does. And yet, whenever I pass that defunct 7-Eleven, which again is often, and it doesn't even look like that anymore, I feel a pang of nostalgia for what it used to mean to me. No one cares. Time passes, the world moves on, our associations are our own, and we cannot command the world to honor them. The world doesn't even know about them. Similarly, in the same town, my parents used to take their car to be serviced at a Gulf filling station owned by a fellow named Buster. It actually said Buster's Gulf on the garage ever since I've been aware that chain gas station and garage franchisees brand their own stations, tag themselves with their own gas stations, and well, they should. I've made it a point to look for those things when there seemed a likelihood of finding them. We don't see Bob's McDonald's, but we do apparently with gas stations. That too was decades ago, Buster's Gulf. Buster was old then and seemed to already have smoked all the cigarettes. He's probably been in long-term storage since the Reagan administration. But the filling station is still there. It just doesn't say Buster's Gulf on it anymore. And I'm not sentimental about that the way I am about the defunct 7-Eleven. It's just a very small, low-key example of the Ozymandias thing. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. What works? I just see a former 7-Eleven now, but with crutches and sans Slurpees. That brings us around to John Montgomery Ward and Helen Dovray. I'm going to be brief about this. This is a story that John Thorne and others have done a better job with than I can do, and as with most stories, that is true of John Thorne, but I have a very different purpose in telling my version, so I hope we can go with it and it will be satisfying. But you can find his much more detailed version of some of this same material at his Our Game blog circa 2011. John Montgomery Ward. Monty Ward, though he apparently hated being called Monty. I am fondly inclined to the name Monty. When I was a kid, one last trip to when I was a kid, I promise, there was a bear in the area named Monty. In retrospect, I suppose that it's most likely that Monty the bear, much like the Cumaean Sybil, would have preferred to be anywhere other than where he was, but I was fondly inclined to Monty. And together, hand in paw, once a week, he and I, Monty and me, we would go and check out the spinner rack at the no longer extant 7-Eleven. This is getting really lachrymose. We're all lachrymose here. That was the Devon cat. The smiling cat was from Cheshire. The depressed cat was from Devon. John Ward, not Monty, okay, was an educated man, having attended Penn State at 13 and then Columbia University. He had to drop out of Penn State at 14 when his mom died. His father was already gone, so he was an orphan without backing, and his solution was to play baseball. Later, mid-career, when he'd achieved some success and some money, he went back to school to Columbia and picked up multiple degrees, including his JD. He's in the Hall of Fame. He was inducted in 1964 and gave a great speech, even though he'd been dead for 39 years. No one could hear it, but that's okay. He was one of those players whose ability to excel all over the diamond suggests the inchoate nature of early professional baseball. He was, as I said earlier, an outfielder, a shortstop, and a pitcher in the early National League, beginning when he was 18. And when a sport is primitive and not sorting talent efficiently, kids can come up and excel, and anyone can play anywhere. He was also a manager, including of the Dodgers and Giants in the 1890s. Most importantly, he was the driving force behind the Brotherhood of Professional Baseball Players, an early attempt at a union, and out of that came the Players' League, an ill-fated attempt to give the players ownership in themselves. Players have been bought, sold, and exchanged as though they were sheep instead of American citizens, Ward said, and so he tried to set up a new circuit in which the players were partners with the moneyed interests that backed the league rather than just their subservient employees. We've talked about that in more detail in prior episodes. We'll get back to the Players League in a second. Ward's Hall of Fame plaque says, pitching pioneer who won 138, lost 102 games in 7 years, pitched perfect game for Providence of the National League in 1880, turned to shortstop, and made 2,151 hits, managed New York and Brooklyn in National League, president of Boston National League 1911 to 1912, played important part in establishing modern organized baseball. At 5'9", he was a small guy with a big mustache. His best season as a position player came in what would be an important year in our story, 1987. He was 200 years old, but still spry as hell. 1887 is what I meant to say. He hit .338, .375, .391. He stole a league-leading 111 bases, although to be honest with you, I'm not completely sure if this was one of the years that the National League counted taking an extra base as equivalent to stealing a base. There were some years like that. He was not generally an impact offensive player as a shortstop. What he was a glove man who could hit well for a shortstop. He was a little more dominating as a pitcher, but given that he began in 1878, we're not really talking about pitching in the modern sense. This is all in the underhand days. He had a league-leading 151 ERA in 1878. He won 47 games while pitching almost 600 innings in 1879. As the plaque says, this is an early foundational player, but not someone whose work on the diamond we can easily relate to what we see when we look at a game today. The woman who would become his wife is actually a little easier for us to imagine because she was an actress, and therefore her path through the world bears more similarities, I think, to that of subsequent actors whose stories are familiar to us, probably right up to the present day, as opposed to Ward's more Dickensian upbringing, and also the version of baseball that he played, which, again, doesn't particularly resemble our own, except in the very basics. Helen DeVray was, for a moment, more famous than Monty Ward was. She was born in 1859. She was born Helen Gibson in San Francisco. She was a child star at first, Little Nell. She traveled all over the country being professionally cute on stage, singing, dancing, doing monologues. Like all child actors, she began to age out, but she wasn't satisfied to just accept that her run was over. She went to Europe, to France, and reinvented herself, seemingly through sheer stubbornness and force of personality, as a legitimate theatrical performer. By then she was in her mid-20s, which puts us in the 1880s. She returned to America, to Broadway. Back then, snobby types felt America had no legitimate theatrical tradition. The play had to be English or French or it was garbage, as Walter Matthau says in The Odd Couple. It's garbage. There were some playwrights laboring to change that. One was Bronson Howard, born in Detroit. One book written during his life referred to him as the Dean of American Drama. No doubt he was surprised. Certainly I was. Howard had about 20 plays produced on Broadway. Now, not all of them were big hits, but that's true of even the greatest writers for the theater, or the greatest writers for anything. Sometimes they just miss, or they've written something good, but for whatever reason, the customers just don't come. Still, he must have had a very good batting average to get produced so often. Soon after Howard died, a critic wrote, "His career as a dramatist was long and honorable. It was also extraordinarily successful. Indeed, it would be difficult to name any playwright who had scored so many hits, most of them bullseyes, with so few misses." He was one of the first, if not the first, American playwright considered quality enough to have his works translated and adapted for performances overseas, where, again, they were just as snobbish about their stuff as we were. It ain't Ibsen, then I ain't going. Helen pressed Howard to write her a show, and he did. It was called One of Our Girls, and it hit the boards on November 10th, 1885, and was an immediate hit, running a very healthy 200 performances. What he created for her was a type that not everyone around then wanted to accept as real because they considered the character itself to be sort of a bad role model or improper, or they hoped and insisted just unreal. It was the independent-minded American woman or girl. One critic wrote, "It seemed that there was but one way for him to picture the American girl, by making her, amidst the conservatism of English convention, a bold, frank, natural type, surprising everyone with her freedom, her boisterousness." Here's the plot of the play as written up by the New York Times when the play came out in 1885. Miss Kate Shipley is an American girl whose father lives on Fifth Avenue, New York, and is worth $$. Miss Shipley's mother was a French girl, and her marriage was against her parents' wishes. She visits her relatives, the Fonblancs, at their chateau near Paris. She sees their only daughter sold, meaning betrothed, in French custom to a roué and gambler. She is at hand to save that daughter from dishonor when the inevitable trouble comes. She helps to bring the wicked husband to justice, and she makes love to an English officer. By makes love, I'm sure you know they don't mean has sex on stage with this other character, but romances or is romanced by, who is, by the way, a very fine fellow. Miss Shipley is a very independent young woman. We sympathize with her French relatives who are shocked and bewildered about her actions. She tells lies to people about America, lies that were old jokes before Miss Shipley was born. She speaks many languages, but she admits that no matter what language she speaks, she is sure to say the very thing she ought not to say. Now, young American ladies do not act in the bold and independent manner affected by Miss Shipley when they are at home. If they did, they would be mistaken for young American women who are not ladies. Miss Shipley is clever and witty, certainly, and she is very kind to sacrifice herself to save a friend, but she is not true enough to nature. Your nature, maybe, Mr. Critic. Maybe you just haven't met the right women yet. I'll take Miss Shipley every time. Early in the play, when her French relatives have been startled by Kate's independence, her way of traveling without a chaperone or a governess, they chastise her, and she replies, "I will try to do everything I can to please you while I am a visitor at your house. If I find it impossible to do so without sacrificing my own self-respect, I shall cease, of course, to be a visitor." I practically cheered reading that. This is a comedy, and reading it, I found myself chuckling. One of the weirdest trends in American culture today is the idea that American men desire subservient women. Dudes, subservience is boring. You want a partner. Back in the 1880s, Howard, and I guess by extension audiences, were pining for an American heroine to be plucky and independent, the way that we've always liked to think of American males, instead of being proper, sober matrons. And you would expect that many of them were, despite whatever the kind of reigning cultural standard was. And of course, you can't make interesting female characters if they're not interesting people. And someone who's always compliant and goes along to get along is not necessarily interesting. A great deal of drama, maybe all of it, arises out of conflict. And how can you orient conflict around a female character who's always demure and shy and keeps her head down and says, "Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am." And the neat thing reading the play about Kate Shipley is that she is not a fish out of water. She is not a rough-hewn American who is being laughed at because she's someone who is uncouth and scratches and spits despite being in the salons of Europe. But really, she is bending the salons of Europe to her strong American personality, which is even more interesting. The French relatives become the people who are the fish out of water metaphor in their own homes just because her own presence is so powerful. And I think if that resonated with audiences, and Helen Dovray resonated with audiences in the part, it's because not only was the play funny or interesting, but because that woman, she's 19 in the story, turns out to be something that people in the audience wanted. Think about all the romantic comedies from our own time, and it doesn't matter whether the protagonist is male or female, but part of the story is their need to leave some stuffy boyfriend or girlfriend or fiancé and marry someone who's more exciting and dynamic and will give their life a little zip. Do we really believe that every American of 1885 wanted to settle for BARF, by which I mean boring above replacement female, or Barb, boring above replacement boyfriend? Mark Twain had published The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in 1876 and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in 1884, adjusting the gender of those characters to whatever you need for just a moment. Imagine if those characters were aged up and maintained the same kind of scampish agency and impulsivity that they have in the books. Would you rather be with Aunt Polly, the Widow Douglas, or Miss Watson, pale, bloodless women, or would you rather have Huckle Female Finn? And again, Kate isn't really that character in the play. She's got manners. She understands how to move in society. She's just an independent thinker. And I expect that people were craving a partner who had life. I hope I'm smart. My wife is very smart. Together, we're both smarter than we would be individually. I've seen the opposite, too, in couples. He's dumb and she's dumb, and together they bring out the worst in each other. I'd like to think that happens by accident, not because someone engineered it thinking that life would just be better that way. Honey, I'm thirsty and nothing's cold. Just drink the water in the goldfish bowl. Oh, okay. Now, who wants to live like that? Wise up, fellers. Now that I've told you about both Ward and Helen Dovray, and the reason that Helen Dovray was more famous than John Ward, I want to tell you what happened when these two crazy kids got together. And we'll do that just on the other side of this second and final break of the episode. I promise. Well, one of our girls ran its course, and Miss Dovray was trying to figure out what to do next. She made some mistakes, like plunking down a lot of cash to reserve a theater, even though she had nothing to put on in it, nothing that people wanted to see anyway. And that's when she either got into baseball or got into John Ward. I want to credit her with finding the New York Giants and then finding him. That's what she said the order was. The papers thought it was the opposite, just as even today they often say about women, or at least they did when I started writing about baseball. Now it seems that so many women are writing about baseball that no one questions their legitimate interest in the game. But back then, again, at the dawn of this century, it was all about how they must have other more prurient interests in mind, and they got very cynical about their motives, as the papers of Helen's time were cynical about hers. In 1887, she began regularly attending Giants games, and she was so into it, she offered of her own volition the Silver Dovray Cup, a trophy which would go to the winner of each year's championship. Now, from 1882 through 1891, the National League's rival circuit was the American Association, not the American League, which was probably not yet even a gleam in Ban Johnson's eye. From 1884 through 1890, the two leagues played an early version of the World Series. I don't know how seriously the players took those series because they weren't paid. Still, if you count those series as legit, you can credit the Cardinals and Braves with an extra championship each, and the Giants with 2. There are only a few surviving images of the Dovray Cup. To my taste, it was ugly as hell. To me, it looked like a spittoon adorned with baseball bats. Here's how Larry G. Bowman described it in a 1997 article for Sabre. Its front featured a right-handed hitter at bat with flying pennants on staffs adorned by 2 baseballs and a catcher's mask located about the hitter's head. Crossed bats formed the handles. The inscription was on the opposite side. The Dovray Cup, presented by Miss Helen Dovray, to the players winning the World's Championship. The trophy was meant to be passed from winner to winner, like the Stanley Cup. Helen wasn't made of money, you know. She wasn't going to commission a new silver spittoon each year. However, if any team won 3 pennants, they would have gotten to keep it. This did not happen during the lifetime of this early World Series, in large part because the attendance war between the National League, the American Association, and John Ward's Players League in 1890 killed the association. It killed the Players League, too. The National League kept playing, obviously. They even play sometimes now, most weekdays during summers, you've probably noticed. And the Braves, who weren't yet the Braves, but as always, it's easier for me to refer to them that way, won 3 consecutive pennants from 1891 through 1893, and in the fall of that last year, won an intra-league World Series between themselves and the Cleveland Spiders. They got to keep the cup. At about the same time she started giving away her cup, Helen became engaged to Ward. Said the New York Times, "This fact explains to a large extent the devotion to baseball recently shown by Miss Dovray. All through the earlier part of the summer, she was a regular attendant at the Polo Grounds and always aggressively and enthusiastically championed the team. Her tiny hands beat each other rapturously at every victory of the Giants, and her dark eyes were bedewed at every defeat. But the thousands of spectators who observed Miss Dovray's emotions little suspected that one of the Giants had any precedence over the others, so far as her affections were concerned. It was noticed that she always applauded Ward when he made his appearances, and that she seemed especially happy when he made a brilliant play. But she was so loyal to all the team that no importance was attached to this shadowy preference." She denied that her order of experience or affections was Ward, then baseball. "I wish to say, in this connection, that I did not meet Mr. Ward on the ball field or through any connection that I might have had with the national game. I met him socially, and I assure you that he is the most charming and cultured man. He speaks 5 or 6 languages and is otherwise well-informed and well-bred." Informed and well-bred he might have been. He didn't speak 5 or 6 languages, and her argument that he was socially worthy of her is pretty funny given that actors were often thought of as being socially unworthy themselves in those days. Simultaneously, she was clearly the celebrity of the pair. When the papers wrote up the engagement, they took it for granted that the readers would know all about the famous Helen Dovray, but figured they needed to explain John Ward a little because he was just a local provincial baseball player. The Ward-Dovray marriage was troubled right from the start. They spent a lot of time apart right from the very beginning. There were 2 explanations offered. First, Dovray wanted to go back to acting, and Ward didn't want her to do that, saying, "No wife of mine," or words to that effect. He might have felt that way because he was fooling around with another actress even then. Some of us just have a type. We all have a type here. There were some false reconciliations, but basically they separated almost right at the beginning and divorced in 1893. She remarried in 1896. Her new husband was one-eyed Admiral Albert Gustavus Winterhalter, a big man in the Navy at that time and continued to be right up through the First World War. And that's almost our signal to leave her, and in fact, everyone we've talked about in this part of the show. Playwright Bronson Howard died in 1908. The last time one of his plays was performed in New York was in 1914. Even in his day, plays were turning more towards naturalism and away from devices like the soliloquy and the aside, whereas he liked to use them. His female characters were modern, but his techniques were not. Helen died in 1923. She's interred at Arlington National Cemetery with her admiral. Note that her headstone lists her acting age, 1862, as opposed to her legit birth date, which was a few years earlier. She's also buried under her birth name, not Helen Dovray, but Helen Gibson. The New York Times obituary for her describes her as a once noted actress, widow of Rear Admiral Winterhalter, buried in Arlington. A generation ago, she was known throughout the United States as Helen Dovray, the star of Bronson Howard's play, Our Girls. They spelled her stage name wrong, they cut half the title of her most famous play, and they led with her husband, not with her now obscure career. Ward expired in 1925. As I said earlier, as his plaque says, he was a foundational figure in baseball, or the struggle to make that foundation fairer. And sure, he's in the Hall of Fame, but he's just another 19th century guy with a mustache. You have to work at it to learn something about him, unlike Ruth or Mantle or Williams, and so on. And as for the cup itself, it's gone. As I said, the Braves got to keep the cup, and one of them promptly lost it. It seems to have vanished circa November 1893 while in possession of one of the Boston National Leaguers. Could future Hall of Famer Kid Nichols have sold the cup, melted it down for silver? What about his fellow plaque holder Hugh Duffy? Did he hit 400 in 1894 because he was rich with ill-gotten gains? We'll never know. More importantly, despite the best efforts of all concerned, Howard is forgotten, unread, and unperformed. Davray is forgotten, Ward is mostly forgotten, and the cup was probably turned into dental fillings. So try your best, slap your name on whatever you want, but you can't expect much, and don't say you weren't warned. So how are the gas prices where you are? Up past $4? Yeah, in my neighborhood too. Fortunately, it doesn't cost anything to drive on over to social media and follow me at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And there remains a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning. Bang, you're there, but maybe you'd prefer to be out having pancakes. Should you wish to support the show, which keeps me in pancakes, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. That is where the Dead Player of the Day blog runs, and last episode's signed book offer is still open if anyone wants to take me up on it. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, trade it in for an electric vehicle. I think in the long run you'll be better off, and your service costs will be lower because there are fewer parts to repair. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of Dr. Rick Boring, who says, "I am deeply offended. I thought this was a family show, and yet you are talking about a single woman hanging around with baseball players and letting all of them touch her cup. I insist on speaking to the manager. Well, if I can just resist breaking into tears in a Pagliacci style, but doctor, I am the manager," and then automatically getting fired by Craig Breslow. What, a manager? Where? I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.